$180,000. Memorize that figure well. That is exactly the amount I invested over the course of 20 years to raise an orphaned nephew, transforming him from a poor boy into a renowned nephrologist. I thought I was investing in the future, in a grateful son, but I was wrong. On the 11th of July 2024, those very same hands that I guided held the scalpel, cut open my abdomen, and stole my 2 completely healthy kidneys while I was in an induced coma. He sold me, the woman he called his second mother, for $100,000 on the black market. He thought that a 9-year-old woman, barely surviving hooked up to a dialysis machine, wouldn't be able to do a thing against a sophisticated organ trafficking ring. But he forgot one detail. I am Alice Cardenas, a seasoned attorney who spent her entire life exposing lies written in paper and ink. And today, I am going to show you how I used those very same forged medical records to put my dear nephew and his entire gang behind bars. If you are listening to me from anywhere in the world, leave your comment and subscribe, because there are truths that need to be broadcast, even if they shake your faith. There are stories that, no matter how painful, must be told. Everyone calls me Licha. I have 79 years well lived behind me. I was born down in Laredo, Texas, in 1945, 3 months after the war ended on the other side of the world. I spent my entire life working as a labor attorney here in San Antonio, 42 years defending people who had broken contracts, hidden workplace accidents, rights denied by some son of a bitch boss who believed the blue-collar worker didn't deserve respect. I defended over 3,000 cases throughout all these years. I won most, lost some, but never, ever in my life did I let a client of mine walk away without understanding exactly what was written in the papers they put in front of them to sign. Today, I live off my Social Security and pension, about $2,500 a month. I have a paid-off condo in a middle-class building here off Broadway Street, quiet neighborhood, H-E-B, grocery store on the corner, CVS across the street. A simple life, organized, no luxuries, but no worries either. Until the day I woke up in that intensive care unit and discovered that the doctor who ripped out my 2 healthy kidneys, sentencing me to spend the rest of my life sticking a thick needle into my arm 3 times a week for hemodialysis, was Hector Beltran, 42 years old, a nephrologist who graduated from a prestigious private university in Houston, the nephew of my late husband, the same boy I raised almost like a son after his father died. I guarantee you, what happened to me was no accident. It was not an unexpected medical complication. It was not fulminant necrosis of a healthy kidney. It was a premeditated crime, coldly calculated, executed by a man I helped become a doctor and who sold me for $100,000 on the organ black market. Each kidney of mine was worth $50,000. Added up, that's $100,000. And what was I left with? Permanent renal failure. A life expectancy that dropped from about 15 years ahead of me to 4, maybe 5 if I get lucky, and 12 hours a week glued to a machine doing the job my kidneys did on their own until that wretch put his hand on me. It took about 3 days for the penny to drop completely, because the morphine they were pumping into my veins left my head half-clouded, my thinking slow, my reasoning cut short. But on the 3rd day, when they lowered the dosage of the pain meds, I woke up with a clearer mind and asked Hector to show me the full medical chart. He made a strange face, said I needed to rest, that it was too much technical information, that it was going to make me more nervous. I replied with a voice that was still weak, but firm. Hector, I worked 42 years reading documents of injured workers, occupational medicine reports, insurance claims, fake certificates, forged papers of all kinds. Show me that file now. He hesitated for about 5 seconds. Time enough for me to realize something was wrong. But in the end, he took the tablet that was on the counter and handed it to me. I read every line of that digital file with the attention I use to read severance agreements. Every comma, every period, every medical term. It read like this. Emergency bilateral nephrectomy performed on the 11th of July 2024 due to acute bilateral renal necrosis detected during lithotripsy procedure. Patient presented intraoperative fulminant renal failure. The removal of both kidneys was opted for to preserve life. Pretty words, technical, convincing for someone who doesn't know how to read between the lines. But I know how to read, and I knew that was a barefaced lie, because 15 days before that cursed surgery, I had done a full battery of blood and urine tests at Quest Diagnostics here in San Antonio. Creatinine, 1.1. Normal value for a woman my age. Bun blood urea nitrogen 1.8, also normal. Creatinine clearance, 78 milliliters per minute. Excellent renal function. Better than many people in their 60 seconds. My kidneys were functioning perfectly, filtering blood without any problem, producing urine in the correct amount, keeping my body balanced. And suddenly, in 15 days, those same kidneys supposedly went into fulminant bilateral necrosis. Impossible. Look, my children, a kidney isn't a light bulb. It doesn't just burn out from one day to the next just like that. If it dies, the body screams, it swells, the urine changes color. But here, everything was total silence. That death only existed on paper. The one who creates that lie is a fool or an accomplice. Necrosis doesn't appear out of nowhere. It doesn't surge in 2 weeks. It doesn't attack both kidneys at the same time without giving any sign beforehand. That was a lie written in the file, and I knew that type of lie well. I had seen dozens of them in labor lawsuits, where the company paid the doctor to write that the worker already had health problems before the accident. The difference is that this time the lie was written on my own body, on my own organs that disappeared from my belly while I slept on the gurney, trusting that the boy I raised was going to take care of me. I spent 42 years of my life picking apart lies written on letterhead paper, recognizing forged signatures, identifying altered medical reports to favor the company that didn't want to pay workers' comp to the injured laborer. I saw workers lose their disability pensions because the insurance doctor wrote in the report that the herniated disc was degenerative, that it wasn't caused by carrying weight in the factory, even when the MRI showed the guy had vertebrae crushed from lifting 100-pound sacks all day for 20 years. I saw people lose million-dollar lawsuits because the medical certificate had the date altered, the stamp forged, the license number invented. I learned to read between the lines of any document, to perceive when a comma is in the wrong place, when a word was chosen with too much care, when the doctor is protecting the corporation instead of protecting the patient. And that file Hector put in my hand had all the marks of a forged report. Justification too vague, technical term used to confuse the layman. Absence of details on how the so-called fulminant necrosis was detected. Necrosis in what part of the kidney? With what appearance? Diagnosed through what intraoperative exam? None of that was written. Only the ready-made excuse. Bilateral necrosis. I had to take out both. I did it to save her life. The glaring inconsistency was temporal. Perfect renal function, documented in May exams. Total fulminant necrosis in July. My lawyer brain turned on the red alert instantly. Any labor judge I knew would look at this type of contradiction and ask for immediate clarification, because when the timeline doesn't square up, when cause and effect make no sense, there is a human hand manipulating information. Those numbers 1.1, 18, 78, became my mantra. I repeated them 1,000 times in my head, associating them with indelible dates. 1.1 was easy. January 1st, my dad's birthday. 18 wasn't my age, but the number of the street where I opened my first office, that little room where I started defending blue-collar workers. And 78, 1,000. 978 was the year that marked my life. Not for a degree, but because it was when I was operated on for the first time trying to be a mother. The year I knew my destiny wasn't to have children of my own, but to care for others. That old association technique was what saved my sanity. An old technique I learned in law school to memorize articles of the National Labor Relations Act worked perfectly to save the proof that my kidneys were healthy 2 weeks before vanishing from my belly. Hector wasn't a distant nephew. He was the son life gave me. When his father died, Ignacio and I paid every cent of his career, his residency in Houston, and his life there. Hundreds of thousands of dollars that came out of our retirement to build his future. The money didn't hurt me, my children. Money comes and goes, and as my old man used to say, nobody can take away the memories you've danced. What tore my soul apart wasn't the thousands of dollars, but seeing what that investment had turned into. What hurt me were the memories that money bought. I remember when he graduated, with his impeccable white coat. He hugged me crying and whispered in my ear, "Aunt Licha, this degree is yours. You are the mother life gave back to me." I believed him. I believed him every time he came to eat at the house on Sundays, serving himself a double plate of my pot roast, telling me my hands were saintly. How was I to imagine that those same hands I fed, those hands I held when he cried over his first girlfriend, would be the ones holding the scalpel to hollow me out? I invested my retirement, yes, but above all, I invested my entire heart in a son who, in the end, only saw in me a container of organs with an expiration date. The pain of open flesh heals, but the pain of knowing that to your son, you are worth no more than a pound of meat. There is no morphine to calm that pain. It's hard to imagine a betrayal deeper than this, right? But don't go away, because Alice is not just any victim. What she is about to do to defend herself will leave her nephew frozen. I lent it to him without asking for a cosigner, without charging interest, without a signed paper, just a verbal agreement that he would pay back when the business took off. He never paid. Every time I brought up the subject, he changed the conversation, said the practice was slow, that the insurance reimbursements were delayed, that he was going to settle up with me next year, and always ended with that little smile. "Auntie, you are my second mother. I will never forget what you did for me." Well, the boy whose 4 years of college and 4 years of med school I paid for, plus 3 years of residency, and still lent $40,000 interest-free, transformed me into a product, sold my internal organs as if they were used car parts, and condemned me to pass the rest of the short life I have left imprisoned to a dialysis machine, sticking 2 thick needles in my arm 3 times a week, feeling the blood go out and come back artificially filtered, because I no longer have the kidneys nature gave me. The truth, folks, is a horrible sensation. Imagine a mechanical vampire sucking the life out of you, filtering it, and giving you back an empty shell. Seeing your own blood run through those plastic tubes. It makes one cry on the inside. That is the price of trusting who you shouldn't. It costs very dear. $180,000 invested in his education, plus $40,000 lent, gives $220,000 that came out of my pocket to make that boy a doctor. And he repaid me by ripping 2 healthy organs from my body to sell for $100,000 on the black market. His net profit, discounting the moral debt he never paid, was negative. But his life continued as normal. Practice running, patients arriving, money coming in. Mine ended that day, the 11th of July 2024, at 9:15 inches the morning, when they put anesthesia in my vein, and I fell asleep, trusting they were going to remove some little 3 millimeters calcium oxalate stones that appeared on the ultrasound, a simple thing that didn't even hurt. The first signs that something was very wrong started to appear in the 3 days following the surgery. Small details that my lawyer brain was cataloging automatically, even under the fog of morphine. The head nurse, a woman of about 50, robust, efficient, avoided looking me straight in the eye when she came to change the dressing. She would enter the ICU room, move the bandages, check the drains, write something on the chart, and leave quickly. Without conversation, without that chat of, "How are you feeling today, ma'am?" It struck me as odd because the ICU nurse is usually communicative, needs to evaluate the patient's mental state, ask silly questions just to see if the person is lucid. She did none of that with me. It was just enter, move, leave. The dialysis tech who hooked me up to the hemodialysis machine also had strange behavior. He stood there with a face of pity, that expression of someone who knows something sad and can't tell. He stuck the 2 thick needles in the fistula of my left arm, connected the tubes to the machine, regulated the flow, and stood looking at me with sorrow, shaking his head slowly, as if thinking, "Poor old lady, she doesn't know the half of what they did to her." Another disturbing detail, the anesthesiologist who applied the anesthesia the day of the surgery disappeared completely. He didn't appear a single time to visit me in the ICU, didn't stop by the room to ask if I was feeling any side effects from the sedation, didn't do that post-op visit that the anesthesiologist always does with a patient who underwent major surgery. I asked the nurse where Dr. Edward was, which was the name I had seen on his scrubs in the pre-anesthesia room. She replied dryly, "Dr. Edward is no longer attending at this hospital." It seemed too strange to me because I had seen his name on the surgical team board. He clearly worked there. Why would he leave right after my surgery? unless he had a motive for not wanting to show his face in post-op, so as not to have to look at the patient he helped mutilate. I stored his name in my memory. Dr. Edward Castillo, anesthesiologist at St. Mary's Hospital in San Antonio, potential accomplice. I branded that name into my memory with fire. I repeated mentally 30 times. Edward Castillo, Edward Castillo, Edward Castillo. Name recorded forever. On the 4th day, Hector appeared with a folded paper in the pocket of his lab coat, took it out with that casual little way of his, and extended it to me, saying it was a retroactive consent I needed to sign. I asked what that was. He explained with a gentle voice that it was hospital protocol, a document confirming that I had authorized the removal of the kidneys in case it was necessary during surgery. I looked at his face and said, "Hector, I never saw that paper before. How am I going to sign consent after the surgery is already done?" "That makes no sense at all," he insisted. He said it was just an administrative formality the hospital was demanding because of an audit and that it wasn't going to change anything. I took the paper from his hand, read that it was a perfect legal trap. Document dated July 10, a day before the surgery, saying I authorized any necessary procedure, including bilateral nephrectomy, in case renal necrosis was detected during the surgical act. The signature was already down there, an imitation of my handwriting. Well done, but not perfect. The A of Alice, or well, the initial of my signature, had the wrong curve, too open. I make it more closed. They say handwriting reflects the soul, but for an old lawyer like me, the tremor betrays the cheater. The one who forges always hesitates an instant on the curves. That tale of the A betrayed my nephew clearer than a confession before a judge. He forgot that his aunt ate her whole life analyzing these scribbles. I handed him back the paper and said with all the calm I managed to gather, "I never signed anything without reading in my entire life. I worked 42 years as a lawyer, and I am not going to start now signing a retroactive document to protect a doctor who took my organs without necessity. You can take that paper away because my signature is never going on there." Hector's face changed in that second. The mask of the concerned doctor fell, the smile disappeared, the eye got hard, and I perceived I had declared war on him without meaning to. He put the paper in his pocket slowly, breathed deep, and said only this, "You're going to regret not cooperating, Auntie," and left the room without looking back. Hector just committed his first big mistake, threatening a lawyer who knows the law better than him. Keep listening, because that refusal to sign is the spark that will burn down his entire empire of lies. I stayed there alone, connected to the machine that hummed quietly, filtering my blood, because my kidneys had disappeared, and I understood that I had just refused to sign the confession of my own complicity in the crime they committed against me. That document was the last piece missing for Hector to transform organ trafficking into a legitimate medical procedure. With my signature there, even if forged, he could present it before any authority and say, "Look, she authorized it. It's all documented. It was all legal." Without my signature, his castle of lies had a huge crack, and I knew that a small crack in a poorly built structure becomes a collapse if someone pushes in the right spot. But don't think I got up from that bed like an Aztec warrior the next day. No, the truth is much sadder. Before the rage came the darkness. I spent entire nights looking at the white ceiling of the hospital, crying in silence so the nurses wouldn't hear me. I felt old, stupid, and disposable. I asked myself, what did I do wrong, my God? Am I worth so little that they dismantled me like an old car? There were moments, I confess to you here in confidence, when I wished the anesthesia had never worn off. I wished I had gone in that dream, so as not to have to wake up to this reality where my nephew was a monster. The loneliness felt cold, colder than the operating room. That shame of having been deceived almost killed me before the lack of kidneys did. It was my lowest moment, my personal Gethsemane, where I had to forgive myself for having loved too blindly. There were nights, looking at the white ceiling, that I thought about ripping out the needles and ending it all. Out of pure shame. Why live if I am a useless old woman, sold by the son she raised? But then I thought, dying like this is for cowards. If he wants me to die to cover up his crime, then I have to live, even if only to unmask him. And I had 42 years of experience pushing rotten structures until they fell. But for you to understand well, how a retired 9-year-old lawyer, imprisoned in an ICU bed, dependent on a dialysis machine to not die poisoned by her own blood, managed to prove that the doctor she trusted had sold her kidneys on the black market, put him in jail, along with 7 more organ traffickers, take down a criminal scheme that moved $10 million and had been running for 9 whole years, and recover part of the dignity they ripped from me along with the organs. I need to go back much further in this story. I need to go back there to 1945, to Laredo, Texas, a railway and agricultural city full of trains whistling at dawn and the smell of locomotive grease. The place where I was born, in the small 3-room house of my dad, Jose Cardenas, an engineer for the Santa Fe Railway, who earned a low wage but had a treasure kept in his head that was worth more than money. The absolute certainty that a written document is worth more than a spoken word, and that a lie always, always leaves a trail on paper. But wait, before going straight to the end of this story and telling how I put Hector and his entire gang in jail, I need to start from the beginning of my life, go back to 1945, when I was born in that Laredo, boiling with trains arriving and leaving, locomotive whistle tearing through the dawn, smell of burnt coal, mixed with dust the wind brought from the ranch lands. I was born in September, 3 months after the war ended on the other side of the world, in a small 3-room house in the downtown barrio, a simple brick construction, clay tile, polished cement floor that my mom Anna scrubbed all Saturday on her knees with a scourer. My dad, Jose Cardenas, was a railroad engineer, a skinny man, burned by the sun, hands calloused from grabbing brake levers and steam cranks. He earned a low wage, a matter of a few dollars back then. It was barely enough for food and rent, but it was a stable job. He had a contract, guaranteed rights, a rare thing in that time of bosses who hired people without any paper and fired them the next day without giving an explanation. My mom was a washerwoman. She woke up at 4 inches the morning to collect dirty clothes from 18 families in the neighborhood, washed everything in the washboard in the patio, wrung it out by hand because there was no washing machine, hung it on the clothesline, ironed with a charcoal iron she heated on the wood stove, and delivered everything folded, smelling of soap. She earned a few cents per large bundle if she worked all day without rest. We were 5 siblings in total. I was the third, the only girl amidst 4 men, Jose and Antonio older, Raimundo and Pedrito younger. Small house, everyone sleeping together, straw mattress on the living room floor, outhouse way in the back of the yard, baths with buckets of cold water we fetched from the spigot in the plaza. Food was rice, beans, flour tortillas, dried meat when there was any, eggs from the backyard chicken, fruit from the mango tree that grew in the neighbor's lot, and we grabbed over the fence. We didn't go hungry, but nothing was left over either. My mom worked miracles with an empty pot, invented bone broth, gruel with pure flour, tortillas with pure salt. I grew up knowing that money was a thing that disappeared fast, that work was an obligation from early on, that complaining changed nothing. But there was one thing in our house that was different from the other poor houses in the barrio. My dad had an obsession with written documents, signed papers, kept receipts. He repeated all the livelong day like a prayer. What is written is written. The word goes into the air. The paper stays. It's no use for the boss to promise. He has to put it on paper. It's no use for the doctor to speak. He has to write it in the certificate. Paper is proof. Word is wind. My dad brought home old railway forms, paper that was going to be thrown in the trash, accident reports, medical certificates of incapacitated engineers, cargo logs, train schedules. He used that as an exercise with me. He sat by my side at the table and spread the papers and said, "Licha, read this paper here and tell me where there is a lie." I was 8 years old. I had just learned to read well in school, and it seemed like a game, a fun challenge. I grabbed the paper, read slowly, and tried to find something strange. One day, he gave me a medical certificate of a colleague of his, an engineer named Mr. Galdino, who had been fired for unjustified absence. The paper said the man had gotten sick on the 15th of March 1953, with typhoid fever, 30 days rest recommended. Only something was wrong on that paper. I felt it, but I couldn't explain what. I looked again, passed my finger over the date, and saw that the number 5 of the day 15 had lighter ink than the rest. The paper was a little smudged around it, as if they had erased something else before. I showed it to my dad. "Look here, Papa. This 5 isn't the same as the other numbers. It looks like they changed it." He took the paper, got close to the lamp, examined with attention, and smiled in that way of his, proud. "That's it, my daughter. Someone changed the date. The original certificate was from the 5th. They changed it to the 15th to make it look like Mr. Galdino missed work before getting sick." My dad grabbed that certificate and took it to the railroad union, showed it to the union steward, explained that the date had been adulterated by the railroad bosses to justify firing for cause. The union filed a grievance, presented the document as proof of fraud, and Mr. Galdino was reinstated to work 2 months later, with the right to receive back pay. I remember he appeared there at the house to give thanks. He brought a sack of flour and brown sugar cones. Simple stuff. But it was what he had to give. He looked at me and said, "Was it this girl who discovered it?" And my dad replied with that pride I never forgot, "Yes, it was. Lecha has a good eye for paper." I learned that day a thing I carry until today. Whoever writes a document, even when lying, leaves a mark, leaves an invisible fingerprint, something that doesn't square well, and it's enough to know where to look to find it. Adulterated date leaves a rubber smudge. Forged signature has a tremor in the curve. Fake stamp has irregular ink. The paper has memory, and the lie can't manage to erase everything. I grew up in that constant training, becoming a specialist in reading paper even before knowing what lawyering was. At 10 years old, I already identified crossed-out receipts. At 12, I already knew when the payroll stub had an incorrect deduction. At 14, I already helped the neighbor review the light bill that came more expensive than it should. My dad said I had been born to work with documents, that my head was made to store numbers and detect errors. I finished elementary school in 1958. I did high school at the public school, and in 1963, at 18 years old, I took the exam for administrative assistant at the Social Security Administration office in San Antonio. I passed in 3rd place, got called up, moved to the city with a cardboard suitcase and a few dollars in my purse. I lived in a boarding house for young ladies. A small room shared with 2 other civil servants. Meals included, cold bath, clothes washed in the collective laundry in the patio. I earned little, sent a part to my mom in Laredo, saved another, spent the rest on transport and work clothes. I worked by day at Social Security, reviewing pension documentation, and at night, I did night school and then the course to enter law school. I slept 5 hours a night, woke up tired, drank strong black coffee to endure, studied on the bus, at lunch hour, on break at work. In 1967, I managed to pass the LSAT and get into St. Mary's University School of Law, one of 3 women approved in a group of 78 students. First day of classes, the introduction to law professor looked at us and spoke with dripping disdain. "Women are no good for law. They're good for typing and secretarial work. If you are here, it's better to give up now before wasting time." I swallowed the insult, wrote his name in the notebook, and promised myself I was going to graduate just to prove he was wrong. I faced harassment from classmates who thought they could put their hands on me, scorn from a professor who gave a lower grade just because I was a woman, hallway jokes about how the female lawyer only served to cry in court. I endured quietly, studied double, got maximum grades in everything, and in 1971, I graduated at 26 years old, 3rd best GPA of the class. I decided to specialize in labor law because I knew that world since I was little. I had seen my dad and the railroad colleagues being exploited. I knew how the boss invented excuses not to pay rights, how the company forged documents to fire an employee without severance. The worker didn't have anyone to defend that right. The union was weak. The lawyer charged expensive fees. The judge took years to judge the lawsuit. I opened a tiny office in a rented space downtown. An old desk, 2 chairs, a borrowed typewriter, and started attending factory workers, bricklayers, maids, people who earned minimum wage and needed a lawyer who didn't charge an absurdity. I charged a contingency fee 20% of what I managed to win in the case. If I lost, I charged nothing. In the 1,970 seconds and 80 seconds, I took hundreds of workplace accident cases, always the same pattern. Worker got hurt in the factory. Company took him to the contracted doctor. Doctor wrote in the report that the guy had a pre-existing condition. that the accident had no relation to the service, that the fault was the worker's own for not using safety equipment. I developed a simple but efficient method. I would grab the occupational doctor's report, compare it with the physical exam the worker had done at another clinic before entering the company, and look for contradiction. If the doctor wrote that the worker had a degenerative herniated disc since forever, but the admission X-rays showed a healthy spine, there was a lie there. If the report said the guy had congenital hearing loss, but the audiometric exam from 6 months ago showed perfect hearing, there was fraud. I memorized normal values for every type of exam: complete blood count, chest X-ray, spirometry, audiometry, EKG. Did I know by heart that normal hemoglobin for an adult male fell between 14 and 18? That white blood cells fell between 4,000 and 11,000? That platelets fell between 150,000 and 400,000? If hemoglobin was at 8 inches March, and the report from April said it was always 14, someone was lying blatantly. I gained fame fast as the lawyer who never forgot a number, who never lost a document, who detected medical lies from miles away. The workers started to seek me out. Word of mouth recommendation. So-and-so won the lawsuit with Counselor Lecha. She managed to prove the company was lying. She caught the doctor in the contradiction. I got to taking 3 new lawsuits per week. The firm grew. I hired a paralegal, bought a steel filing cabinet to keep files, a copier to copy documents. I learned that paper was everything in this type of fight. Whoever had more paper, more proof, more contradictory reports, won. Powerful corporation with expensive lawyer could invent any story. But if I presented an exam dated, signed, stamped, that contradicted the official report, the judge had no way to ignore it. Paper against paper, proof against proof, and in the middle remained the truth, waiting to be discovered by whoever knew how to read between the lines. Look at the turns life takes. Lecha spent 42 years sharpening that gift to detect medical lies without knowing that destiny was preparing her for the most painful case of her history, judging her own blood. Do not forget this detail, because that obsession with papers will be her only lifeline when everything else fails. In 1975, at 30 years old, I married Ignacio Beltran, a civil engineer I met in a labor lawsuit I took against a construction company, where he was the site foreman. Serious man, 8 years older than me, responsible, hard-working, earned well, had his own car. We got married in the church, small party, moved to a rented 2-bedroom apartment in the Alamo Heights area. We tried to have children right away in the first year. I couldn't get pregnant. Second year, same thing. Third year, I went to the gynecologist, did tests, discovered I had severe endometriosis, uterus full of stuck tissue, blocked tubes, compromised ovary. Doctor said I needed to operate. I did 3 surgeries between 1,978 and 1,982. Solved nothing. Permanent infertility. Ignacio said there was no problem, that we were happy just as we were, that a child wasn't an obligation. I accepted, moved forward, dedicated myself to work with double energy, and it was there that Hector entered my life. Ignacio had a sister 12 years younger, Elena, pretty girl, without a profession, who married a mechanic in San Antonio at 21. In 1982, she had her only son, Hector, and it was the only time I felt that pang of good envy, desire to have my own boy to raise. I accompanied his growth from afar, holiday visits, birthdays, those things. In 2001, when the boy was 19 years old, his dad suffered a motorcycle accident coming back from the shop at night. A truck ran over him. He died instantly. Elena was left a widow at 41, unemployed, no income, with son Hector in his first semester of pre-med at a private college. Ignacio didn't think twice. He said we would assume the bill, that the boy deserved the best education money could buy. We paid for 4 years of college and 4 years of medical school, expensive tuition, imported books, and medical equipment from 2002 until 2010, plus lab fees, material fees, fees for this and that. It closed at $220,000 total. Money that came out of our retirement, from the savings we gathered working like pack mules our whole lives. But we invested with gusto because Hector was a striving boy. Studious, polite, he called every week giving thanks, sent messages saying he was going to repay everything when he graduated. I went back to work because the bills didn't stop arriving, and I assumed alone the commitment to bankroll the nephrology residency Hector was going to do in Houston. 3 years of residency. Apartment rented in the medical center area for $2,000 a month, plus help for food and transport, all added up gave a fortune. Added with med school, I invested hundreds of thousands in the medical training of Hector Beltran. Money I never asked back, never put on paper, never asked for interest, nor adjustment. It was investment in family, in a nephew I raised almost like a son, in a boy who called me Aunt Mom. He returned to San Antonio, board certified in 2013. He worked in a public hospital for a few years, and in 2015 asked me to lend him $40,000 to open his own private practice in a commercial building in the Stone Oak area. I lent it to him without thinking twice, without a signed paper, without an agreed payment date, just a word agreement that he would return it when he could. He never returned it. Every time I touched on the subject, he invented an excuse, said the insurance delayed payments, that the office rent was expensive, that he was going to settle with me next year, and always ended with that smile and that phrase, "Auntie, you are my second mother. I will never forget what you did for me." Well, it was that boy I raised, in whom I invested millions plus the loan, who started to give strange signals at the beginning of 2024. First signal came in March. Call from him in the middle of the week, a thing that wasn't common because generally we only spoke on the weekend. He said I needed to do a complete checkup of the kidneys, that he had seen worrying statistics about renal failure in women over 75, that I should take better care of myself. It seemed exaggerated to me. I said I felt fine, had no symptoms whatsoever, but he insisted so much that I scheduled exams just so he would stay calm. Second signal came in April. Another strange call, this time talking about a will, saying I should update it, that it was important to leave things organized, that I should put something for the nephews. It struck me as odd, because he was a nephew by marriage. He had no legal right to my inheritance. And besides, I already had a will made, leaving everything to a charity institution. I didn't give it much importance, changed the subject. Third signal came in May, when the exams came out perfect, renal function excellent, creatinine 1.1, BUN 18, clearance 78. The doctor who ordered the exams said my kidneys were functioning better than those of many people in their 60 seconds. I called Hector to give him the good news. He became kind of disappointed, said he didn't trust that lab, that I should repeat the exams in another place. I replied that I wasn't going to be pricking my vein for nothing, that the exam had come out fine and period. Fourth signal came still in May. WhatsApp message from him asking my blood type, said it was to update his registry of family patients. It seemed extremely strange to me because a doctor doesn't update the registry of an aunt who isn't even his patient. But I replied, "Oh, negative." He sent that little yellow thumbs up and didn't touch the subject again. Fifth signal, the most screaming of all, came in June when he called, saying he had scheduled my surgery for kidney stone removal at St. Mary's Hospital in San Antonio. Simple surgery, was going to resolve quickly. He himself was going to do it. I asked why there if there were other hospitals. He invented that that one had more modern equipment, that it would be safer for me. I didn't question further, because I trusted him blindly. I believed the doctor knew what he was doing, that the nephew I raised was never going to hurt me. Respond here with sincerity. How many times did you ignore the signs because the person was family? How many times did you let strange behavior pass because you didn't want to believe that someone you raised, whose entire college you paid for, whom you treated like a son, was capable of betraying you in the worst way possible? Comment there if you understand me, or if you think I was a foolish old woman who deserved to lose her kidneys for being innocent, for having trusted too much, for not having perceived that every strange call, every question about the will, every insistence to do an exam, every request for blood type, all that was preparation for the day he was going to put me to sleep and rip out my organs to sell on the black market. Because I ask myself that question every blessed day when I bathe and see the 2 catheters coming out of my chest, when I sit in the chair at the dialysis clinic and they stick the thick needles in my arm, when I look in the mirror and see that only the shell is left of who I was before. The first week after that cursed surgery was a hell I don't wish on my worst enemy. Pain in the lower back region that seemed like they had ripped out a piece with rusty pliers. It throbbed without stopping day and night. There was no position to lie down that gave relief. Strong meds I took barely tickled that deep pain coming from inside the hollow where my organs were before. They hooked me up to the hemodialysis machine for the first time on Tuesday, 2 days after the surgery, a procedure that was going to become routine 3 times a week for the rest of the life I had left. The nurse stuck 2 thick needles in the fistula they had made in my left arm, one to take out dirty blood, another to return it clean. And I stayed there sitting 4 hours straight, watching my blood go out dark red and come back light red, passing through that noisy machine that buzzed just like an old refrigerator. The first session was terrible. Blood pressure crashed in the middle of the procedure, cold sweat running down, dizziness, urge to vomit. The nurse had to stop everything and give saline in the vein so I wouldn't faint. The second session was even worse. Cramps in the legs that hurt like a knife stab, muscle contracting on its own. I screamed in pain. The tech gave me, I don't know what that relieved it a little, but left the body watery. Strange sensation of floating far from myself. In 2 weeks, I lost 24 pounds. From 150 that I weighed before the surgery, I went to 126. Clothes got loose. The ring on the finger came off by itself. The hip bone appeared protruding under the skin. I couldn't eat well. Constant nausea. Everything tasted like iron in the mouth, that taste of blood that never went away. The nutritionist at the dialysis clinic put me on a restrictive diet that seemed like punishment. Maximum of 16 ounces of liquid per day, less than 2 glasses, including water, coffee, soup, fruit with water, everything. 0 potassium, which meant 0 banana, 0 orange, 0 tomato, 0 beans, 0 of everything that has good flavor, 0 phosphorus, which cut milk, cheese, red meat, soda. Leftover was white rice, chicken breast without salt, boiled squash without flavor, apple without skin, hospital food, graceless, lifeless, but it was what my body managed to process without the kidneys to filter the excess. Blood pressure went completely out of control. Went up to 180 over 110, even taking 3 different meds. The doctor said it was constant risk of stroke, that I had to be attentive to any tingling, any strong headache, any slurred speech. Worse than all was the anemia that came like an avalanche. Hemoglobin crashed from 13 to 7 in a matter of days, because the kidney is who produces erythropoietin, hormone that tells the marrow to manufacture red blood cells. Without kidney, no hormone. Without hormone, no blood cell. Without blood cell, no oxygen circulating well. I got too weak. I got tired going up 3 steps. Heart raced just from getting up from the chair. I had to take synthetic erythropoietin injection twice a week, prick in the belly that burned like fire ant. 3rd week came the nephrologist who assumed my case. Young man of about 40. It wasn't Hector. It was another from the hospital who had nothing to do with the surgery. He sat beside my bed, looked at me with the grim expression of a man bearing bad news, and delivered the verdict. Miss Cardenas, I need you to understand your condition. Patient of 79 years on hemodialysis has average life expectancy of 3 to 4 years. You are going to need a kidney transplant to live longer than that. But at your age, the chances of getting a compatible donor are small. The transplant list has age criteria. Unfortunately, ma'am, you are not priority. I heard that and felt the floor disappear beneath my feet. 3 to 4 years of life, maximum. Before that surgery, I had the expectation of living some 15 years still, maybe until 94, 95. My mom had lived until 87, and my dad until 83. Good genetics in the family. Hector had cut my life in half, had stolen 10, 12 years from me, had condemned me to die imprisoned in a machine, dependent on a needle in the arm 3 times a week, incapable of traveling, of leaving near the dialysis clinic, of living anything that seemed like freedom, from an independent and active life. Retired lawyer who went to the gym 3 times a week, who traveled to Laredo to visit relatives, who did the grocery shopping alone, who drove my old car everywhere. I started living dependent, limited, fragile, trapped in a hospital routine that sucked 12 hours a week of my existence, not counting the recovery time after each session. Those 6, 8 hours I stayed at home too exhausted to do anything beyond lying on the sofa and waiting for the body to function again. Elena appeared to visit me in the 2nd week. She arrived at the ICU room crying like a lost girl, red eyes, tissue in hand, voice trembling. She sat on the edge of the bed and blurted out immediately, "Licha, Hector called me saying you are accusing him of horrible things, that you are confused, that you are saying he ripped out your kidneys on purpose. Please, tell me it's not true. Tell me you aren't thinking my son would be capable of doing a thing like that." I looked at her face and saw that Hector had done his dirty work well done. He had turned his mother against me, had planted in her head that I was senile, crazy, inventing an absurd story. I tried to explain calmly. "Elena, for the love of God, look at my exams from May. My kidneys functioned better than yours. I have the papers. Numbers don't lie. How is it possible that 2 weeks later they are rotten? It is biologically impossible. How is that possible?" She shook her head, refusing to accept. "You are confused, Licha. The surgery left you confused. My son is a doctor. He studied 8 years, did 3 of residency. He knows what he does. He would never hurt you. You who paid for his studies. You who helped him graduate." I insisted, showed the papers of the exams, pointed out the numbers, explained that necrosis doesn't appear in 15 days, that there was screaming inconsistency there. Elena closed her face, got up from the bed and said with a cold voice, "You are speaking those things because you are old, because the head doesn't function well anymore, because you don't understand medicine. My son saved your life, Alice, and you are here accusing him of a crime. That is ingratitude. It is absurd." She left the room slamming the door, left me there alone with that horrible sensation of screaming the truth in the middle of a bunch of people who chose to be deaf. What terrible loneliness is felt when even your own blood turns its back on you. It seems like everything is lost for Licha, but sometimes help arrives from whom you least expect. Pay attention to what follows. That is what hurts most, children. Not the scalpel, but that your own blood looks at you like a crazy woman. Elena isn't bad, she is cowardly. She prefers to believe I am senile than to accept her son is a monster. Would you endure the world turning its back on you and calling you crazy when you are the only sane ones? Comment down below. Tell me I'm not alone in this. Hector had done it perfectly. He isolated me socially, turned the only family I had left against me, planted the idea that I was senile, demented, confused, unreliable. Anything I said from then on was going to be interpreted as an old woman's delusion. Speech of people who lost lucidity. Perfect strategy to commit a crime and go unpunished. Because who was going to believe me against a doctor, against a graduated nephrologist, against the dedicated nephew who had saved the aunt from the tragic medical accident? The worst was discovering that Hector had spread that story to the other doctors in the hospital. I also heard him talking with the cardiologist in the hallway, room door ajar, his voice low but audible. "My aunt is starting with senile dementia. If she says anything strange to you guys, ignore it. It is post-op mental confusion mixed with advanced age." The cardiologist agreed, said it was common, that elderly patient, after general anesthesia, tends to have episodes of disorientation. I perceived in that moment that he had constructed a shielded narrative. Any accusation of mine was going to be discarded as a symptom of dementia. Any proof I tried to present was going to be seen as old lady paranoia. I stayed isolated inside that hospital, surrounded by people who looked at me with pity, who treated me like a poor, senile thing, who didn't even know what she was saying. While the true criminal circulated free through the hallways, impeccable white coat, smile of a trustworthy doctor, reputation intact. In the second week, I tried to access my full medical file through the hospital's online portal, My Chart. Legal right of any patient, it stands in the law, HIPAA. But when I put in my social security number and password, the system froze. Error message. Access denied. Contact administration. I called administration. The girl who answered said she was going to verify, put me on hold, came back 5 minutes later, speaking that my access had been blocked temporarily by medical order. I asked which doctor had given that order. She hesitated, said she couldn't inform, that it was internal protocol. I hung up the phone, knowing exactly who had blocked. Hector, obviously, hiding information, covering tracks, preventing me from having access to the details of my own surgery. In the afternoon of that same day, he appeared in the room, face of false concern, well rehearsed, and asked, "Auntie, what is the problem? Why is the lady wanting to see the file? Don't trust me?" I looked straight into his eyes, without deviating, and replied with the firmest voice I managed. Hector, I worked 42 years as a lawyer. I learned one basic thing that never fails. Whoever blocks information has something very ugly to hide. I saw him swallow dry, jaw tensed, hand closed slowly. He left the room without replying, left in the air that heavy tension of someone who knows he was unmasked, but still doesn't admit it. In the third week, during a dialysis session at the clinic that was annexed to the hospital, the dialysis tech, who was connecting me to the machine, whispered softly while sticking the second needle in my arm. "Counselor." The lady wasn't the first. I lifted my head fast, looked at her. Short woman of some 30-something years, dark skin, curly hair tied back, badge with name Veronica Perez. I asked, whispering too. "How do you mean I wasn't the first?" She looked around, checked if anyone was hearing, and completed even lower. "I already saw 3 other patients of Dr. Hector enter here with kidney stones and leave in dialysis, all people who had good kidneys before the surgery. I can't speak anymore. If they discover I told the lady this, they fire me on the spot. I have 2 small kids. I can't lose this gig." Finished connecting the tubes, regulated the machine, and left fast, but not before I memorized every letter of that name. Veronica Perez. I repeated 20 times in my head, recorded in memory using the old association technique. Veronica with verify, truth. Perez with Perez, common last name. That information changed everything, confirmed what I already suspected. It hadn't been an accident. It hadn't been an isolated case. It was a pattern, a scheme, a crime repeated various times with other victims. Hector had done that before, with at least 3 more people that Veronica had seen with her own eyes, and probably there were others she didn't know. In the 4th week, I managed through an acquaintance who worked in the administrative sector of the hospital to get a copy of the surgical consent form that allegedly I had signed the day prior to surgery. The paper said I authorized any necessary procedure during the surgical act, including partial or total nephrectomy, in case a grave anomaly putting my life at risk was detected. Signature down there, date of the 10th of July 2024. Handwriting that looked like mine, but wasn't. I grabbed a magnifying glass I had in the nightstand drawer, examined every curve of that false signature, and identified the difference. The initial letter of my name was too open. I make it closed. The tail of the last letter was too short. I make it long. Good forgery. Well done. Capable of deceiving a layman, but not capable of deceiving the lawyer who spent a life identifying forged signatures on medical certificates and labor documents. I kept that paper as proof, hid it in the bottom of my purse, and started plotting the next step. I had an old cell phone kept in the drawer at home, ancient device with a SIM card I used only for emergency. Number nobody knew, neither Elena nor Hector. I asked the neighbor to look for that cell phone for me. Invented an excuse that I needed to see some old photos that were saved there. When she brought it, I called attorney Thomas Villalobos, an old lawyer from San Antonio, who had been a colleague of mine back in the day I worked at Social Security. Serious man, competent, specialist in civil and criminal law. I explained the whole situation to him. Surgery that took my healthy kidneys, suspicion of organ trafficking, forged signature on consent, other victims the nursing tech had mentioned. Thomas listened to everything in silence, and at the end said, "Licha, if what you are telling me is true, this is the most atrocious crime I have heard in my life. I am going to need judicial authorization to investigate. Subpoena for bank records of the doctor, access to files of other patients, handwriting expert analysis on that signature. It's going to cost some $15,000 just to start," I replied without blinking. "I have $100,000 in the bank. Use what you need. I want that wretch in jail, even if I spend down to the last cent I gathered in life." Thomas filed a motion for discovery, alleging suspicion of fraud and medical malpractice, requesting Hector's financial records. He presented my preoperative exams showing perfect renal function, presented the surgical report alleging sudden necrosis, pointed out the screaming temporal inconsistency. The judge analyzed, considered there was sufficient indication of serious crime, and granted the order in 5 days. The bank was obliged to hand over the complete statement of Hector's account for the last 12 months. What appeared there was the irrefutable proof I needed. Deposit of $50,000 in his account on July 13. 2 days after my surgery. Transfer coming from an offshore account registered in the Cayman Islands, held by a company called Med Global Import-Export. 5 days later, July 18, another deposit of $50,000. Same origin, same shell company. Total $100,000. Dollars falling into the account of a doctor who officially earned $15,000 a month in salary. There is the irrefutable proof. The life of a mother sold for a fistful of bills. Alice's indignation is about to turn into a legal storm. Let's see how she plans to use these numbers to catch them. Thomas called me, voice tense, and said, "Lecha, this here is concrete proof of organ trafficking. Each kidney of yours was sold separately to 2 different buyers, probably rich patients who skipped the transplant line paying for a stolen organ. That is no longer just suspicion, it is a proven crime." I cried when I hung up that phone. I cried from rage, from pain, from humiliation, from understanding that the boy I had raised, that I had paid 4 years of college, 4 years of med school, and 3 of residency for, had dismantled me alive and sold me piece by piece, as if I were a chicken in the butcher shop. $100,000. It was what I was worth dismantled. It was the price he had put on my internal organs, less than what I had invested in him, less than the hundreds of thousands that came out of my pocket to make him a doctor, less than any reasonable calculation of gratitude, decency, basic humanity. In the 5th week, I had a crisis during the dialysis session. I broke down crying in the middle of the procedure. Uncontrolled sobbing, incapable of stopping. Blood pressure crashed to 70/40, almost fainted sitting there in the chair with needles stuck in the arm. The nurse came running, disconnected everything in a hurry, laid me on the gurney, lifted my legs, applied saline in the vein so pressure would rise. I stayed there, looking at the white ceiling of that room, hearing the noise of the other dialysis machines working around, seeing other patients connected just like me, people of 40 to 50 years, too young to be imprisoned in that hospital routine forever. And I thought, what to fight for? I'm going to die in 3 years anyway, 4 maximum, trapped in this cursed machine 3 times a week, without family believing me, without strength to continue. I thought about giving up right there, about signing whatever paper Hector wanted, about accepting the official version that it had been an inevitable medical accident, about passing the years left to me quiet, resigned, waiting for death to arrive. But then came my dad's voice in memory, that phrase he repeated since I was little, the mantra that guided my entire life. Lecha, injustice written on paper can be unwritten with a better paper. Paper against paper, proof against proof, lie against documented truth. I got up from that gurney with the determination I thought I had lost. I called Thomas again and said, "I want you to request access to the data of all nephrology patients Hector attended in the last 5 years. I want name, social security number, date of surgery, admission diagnosis, discharge diagnosis. I want everything." He hesitated. "Lecha, that is going to cost dear. It's dozens of experts, hundreds of pages of documents. We are going to have to hire an assistant, medical expert, handwriting expert." I interrupted. "I have money saved. Use however much you need. It doesn't matter to me dying poor. It matters to me dying knowing that criminal is loose, practicing medicine." Thomas entered with a new judicial request, discovery motion, this time asking for access to the files of all 127 patients Hector had attended between 2019 and 2024, alleging investigation of possible serial criminal practice, RICO. The judge authorized. The hospital was obliged to hand over complete files, pre- and post-op exams, consent forms, everything. It took 3 weeks to gather the material. Huge pile of paper, digital file, with thousands of pages. Thomas hired 2 assistants and a medical expert to analyze everything, looking for pattern, inconsistency, case similar to mine, and they found 11 patients who entered Street, Mary's Hospital with diagnosis of simple kidney stones and left there without both kidneys, dependent on hemodialysis for the rest of their lives. 11 victims in 5 years, average of 2 per year, all with excellent renal function in preoperative exams, all with claim of sudden necrosis during surgery, all with signed consent form authorizing bilateral nephrectomy in case of emergency. And the most frightening detail, all were blood type O negative or O positive, universal donors, the most valuable types in the organ black market. Now I ask you, and I want you to answer yourselves with hand on heart. If you discovered that your own blood sold you for a handful of bills, would you stay quiet? I know many prefer not to look, prefer to pass by. But if this story indignates you as much as me, help me make it known. Let it not stay in oblivion, because silence is the best friend of people like Hector, who believe the doctor has the right to do whatever he wants with the patient, that it is okay to transform people into merchandise. Go on, hit like there. It costs nothing, doesn't hurt, doesn't take a piece of you. And help me spread this story so more people don't fall for the scam of the family doctor, of the nephew who feigns gratitude while planning to dismantle you alive on the operating table. Hit like now, because what comes next is the part where I show how a 9-year-old lady, retired lawyer, who spent a life defending the wronged worker, used every technique she learned in 42 years of profession to dismantle the entire scheme, put Hector in jail, along with 7 more traffickers, recover part of the dignity they ripped from me, and guarantee other women wouldn't suffer what I suffered. The following Monday, when I was at home resting from a dialysis session that had left me exhausted, I received a WhatsApp message from an unknown number. Short message, but changed everything. Counselor Alice, I am Veronica from dialysis, the one who spoke with you last week. I need to speak with you urgently. They would fire me if they knew I am contacting you, but I can't stay quiet watching what I saw. I replied at the moment. Where can we meet? She suggested a small coffee shop in Alamo Heights in San Antonio. Discreet place, far from the hospital, far from any place where someone could recognize us. I scheduled for the next day, 10 inches the morning, asked my neighbor to take me by car because I still wasn't able to drive alone after the surgery. I arrived at the cafe 5 minutes early, sat at a corner table far from the window, and waited. Veronica appeared punctual, short woman, 5'1" max, petite body, curly hair cut very short, close to the head, burn scar on left arm going up from wrist to elbow, old mark looking like childhood. She sat in front of me, ordered black coffee without sugar, breathed deep, and started to tell. Counselor, I was fired from the hospital last week, she said with low voice, looking around to ensure nobody was listening. Official allegation was inappropriate conduct, insubordination, lack of respect for medical hierarchy. The truth is, I reported irregularity in the operating room, and they punished me for that. I asked what type of irregularity. She swallowed dry and let loose. I saw Dr. Hector remove both kidneys from a patient who was there only for simple stone removal surgery, woman of 60-something years, normal pre-op exams, perfect renal function. I was assisting the procedure because it was part of the training of a new tech who had arrived in the sector. The procedure started normal. Anesthesia, incision, access to left kidney. But then Dr. Hector asked for instruments that had nothing to do with lithotripsy, asked for scalpel-specific for total nephrectomy, asked for vascular clamp, asked for renal artery suture. I questioned softly to the nurse Felipe, who was beside me. Why instruments for total removal if it's just to take out stones? Felipe told me to shut my mouth, said the doctor knew what he was doing. 15 minutes later, I saw Dr. Hector put the patient's left kidney inside a cooler the driver had brought, seal it, hand it over for him to leave running with that. Half an hour more, and he did the same thing with the right kidney. Another cooler, same driver running to leave the hospital. Veronica paused, took a sip of coffee, hand trembling holding the cup. I left that surgery and went straight to speak with the hospital director, Dr. Claudia Mendoza. Told what I had seen. Said that wasn't normal protocol, that there was something very wrong. She listened to me with stone face and replied, "You are a nursing tech. You aren't a doctor. You don't have qualification to question surgical decision of expert nephrologist. If you continue spreading that type of comment, you are going to answer for defamation." I left there scared, but didn't give up. Sought the head of nursing, told the same thing. The answer was similar. Don't get involved in business you don't understand. 3 days later, I was called to HR. Allegation of inappropriate conduct, insubordination, firing for cause, without right to severance. I lost my job, lost health insurance for my kids, lost everything because I dared to open my mouth. I looked at her and asked, "Why are you telling me this now? Why risk yourself even more?" Veronica looked straight in my eyes and said with firm voice, "Because I have nothing more to lose, counselor." I already lost everything when I reported. Now I just want to see that man pay for what he did with you and with the other victims I saw pass through that operating room." She told then her complete story. I needed to understand why she was doing that, why she was risking exposing herself even more. Veronica Perez, 38 years old, nursing tech, graduated 15 years ago, worked since 23 Inches Hospital, heavy shift, low wage, hard life, but honest. Married at 24 with a mechanic. Had twins in 2013, Santiago and Sofia, beautiful kids who at 2 years old started showing signs something wasn't right. Didn't speak, didn't look in eyes, made repetitive movements, went into crisis when routine changed. Diagnosis came at 3 years. Severe autism in both. Level 3, permanent dependence. Needed intensive therapy for the rest of life. The husband didn't handle the pressure. Said he hadn't signed contract to be dad of defective kids. Those were his words, defective kids. And he left the house in 2016, leaving her alone with 2 3-year-olds needing constant attention. Veronica assumed everything alone. Raising, therapy, bills, support, became mom and dad at same time. Earned $3,000 a month at the hospital, grabbed extra shifts on weekends to make another $1,000, total of some $4,000 a month when managed to double shift. Therapy for the twins cost $2,500. Speech therapist twice a week, occupational therapist twice, psychologist once, everything out of pocket, because through state insurance the list had years of waiting. Left over were a few dollars to pay rent, food, clothes, meds, lights, water, gas, transport. Nothing was left over. In truth, it was lacking every month. Had to juggle, pay one bill, and let another slide, negotiate with therapist, ask for discount, pay in installments on credit card. The kids' health insurance came along with her job at the hospital. When she was fired, she lost the insurance. Cobra was too expensive. Lost the security of being able to take the kids to the doctor if they got sick. Lost everything. "Now I am unemployed for a week," she spoke with tired voice, "looking for vacancy in another hospital, but nobody hires tech who was fired for cause. Stain on the record, reputation ruined. Severance money I didn't receive because it was justified, so I have nothing saved. I am going to start missing rent next month. I don't know how I am going to pay the kids' therapy. But know what leaves me most indignant, counselor, is knowing I reported a very grave thing, an atrocious crime, and it was me who got screwed, not him. Doctor, Hector continues there operating, making money, selling organs of people who trust him, and I, who tried to do the right thing, am here unemployed, without knowing how I am going to feed my kids." At that moment, we were no longer a lawyer and a nurse, nor an old woman and a young one. We were 2 mothers, wounded by life, 2 women the system had tried to crush. I grabbed her rough hands, hands of a working woman just like my washerwoman mother's, and felt an electric current. It wasn't just rage uniting us, it was the need to protect the innocent. I looked her in the eyes, those tired eyes but full of fire, and said with heart in hand, "Child, you lost your job for defending the truth, and I lost my health for trusting the lie. But together, we are dangerous. We aren't going to do it just for vengeance. We are going to do it for your twins and for the children I didn't have. God put you in my path, not as a witness, but as the angel I needed to not give up." We cried together right there, in the middle of the cafe, not caring that people looked at us. It was the first moment in months I didn't feel alone. I have proofs starting to appear. We are going to take down that wretch together, and when he falls, I guarantee you are going to have back what you lost. With interest. She wiped a tear that ran down, smiled in that tired way of someone who has suffered too much, but still has hope, and asked, "What do you need me to do?" I explained the plan I was assembling in my head since Thomas had found the 11 victims of Hector. I needed access to the complete files of those 11 patients. Not just the summary the hospital had given the judge, but the whole archive, every detail, every note, every exam. Veronica nodded. My access to the system is still active. The firing was last week, but access to the system takes 30 days to be blocked. Their security protocol, I can enter and download what you need, but it has to be fast before they realize. Agreed? She was going to access the system that night from her house, download file by file, Save everything on a USB drive. Hand it to me next day. We left that cafe with alliance formed. Two women screwed by the same corrupt system decided to use what remained of strength to take down who thought he was above the law. Two women against a powerful mafia. Seems like an unfair fight, but never underestimate the strength of someone who has nothing to lose. What they will discover together in those USB files is chilling. Tuesday night, 12:15 a.m., I received a message from Veronica. Got everything. 11 complete files. 2,400 pages of document. Meet Wednesday morning. She handed me the small USB drive with green print. Zip file protected by password only we two knew. I spent the next 3 days locked in my apartment, reading every page of those files, using all techniques I learned in 42 years of labor law to identify inconsistency, forgery, written lie. I created a comparative table in the big notebook I bought at Office Depot. Column 1, with patient name. Column 2, with pre-op exams showing renal function. Column 3, with surgical report, alleging necrosis. Column 4, with temporal inconsistency, which proved lie. Patient 1, Mrs. Lucia, 67 years, creatinine, 1, in January 2020. Surgical report of February, alleging chronic renal necrosis of over 5 years. Obvious lie. Kidney doesn't stay with normal creatinine in January and chronic necrotic in February. Patient 2, Mr. Carlos, 71 years. Creatinine clearance, 82, in March 2021. Report alleging acute renal failure during surgery in April. Impossible. Acute failure doesn't happen with excellent clearance a month before. I went patient by patient, found inconsistency in all 11 cases, documented everything, noted every contradiction. Patient 4, Mr. Manuel, 63 years, marked me especially creatinine 1 on the 3rd of March 2022. Surgical report of March 5, alleging chronic renal necrosis of years. Chronic necrosis of years doesn't appear in 48 hours. It is biologically impossible. I learned that defending worker with silicosis in lungs. Chronic disease leaves temporal trail. Doesn't surge out of nowhere between Tuesday and Thursday. Besides temporal inconsistencies, I identified another disturbing pattern. The same anesthesiologist had participated in all 11 surgeries. His name appeared on every anesthesia chart, handwriting equal in all files, identical signature, Dr. Edward Castillo, medical license number 1345. That man wasn't casual accomplice, was essential piece of the scheme, responsible for keeping patient asleep, time enough for Hector to extract organs without hurry, responsible for not letting patient wake up in middle of extraction and discover what was happening. I noted his name with red highlight in notebook, Dr. Edward Castillo, anesthesiologist, accomplice, as guilty as Hector. I took all that material to Thomas. He analyzed along with his assistant and hired handwriting expert to examine signatures on consent forms of 11 patients. The expert was Mr. Gadelha, 70 years old, retired from the FBI after 35 years, working in criminal forensics, specialist in document forgery, one of best in country. Took 2 weeks examining every signature, comparing with true documents we got from patients or families, using loop, special light, pen pressure analysis, writing angle. The finding was categorical: 11 signatures forged, all made by same hand. Professional forger, high-quality imitation, but with identifiable characteristics. Microscopic tremor in curves, hesitation in beginning of capital letter, irregular pen pressure. None of those signatures had been made by patients. All had been forged. Crime of public document forgery added to crime of organ trafficking. With handwriting analysis in hand, Thomas left for next stage, locating 11 patients. 8 were still alive, dependent on hemodialysis scattered between San Antonio, Austin, and Houston. 3 had died. One of generalized infection 6 months after surgery, another of stroke 3 months later, third of cardiac arrest during dialysis session, 1 year later. I visited personally each of the 8 survivors, sat with them, showed my exams, showed my case, explained scheme, asked them to enter class action lawsuit Thomas was assembling. 5 accepted at the moment, indignant, crying, realizing they hadn't been only ones, that they had been victims of organized gang. 2. Hesitated with fear of reprisals, fear of messing with powerful doctor, but in end accepted after I guaranteed they were going to have legal protection. 1 refused, said didn't want problems, was already too old for fight, preferred to die in peace. Respected decision, but went forward with other 7. Contacted families of 3 who had died, explained situation, asked authorization to include them in action as post-mortem victims. 3 families accepted, wanted justice for relatives who had been murdered little by renal failure caused criminally. With 10 confirmed victims plus me, 11 total, Thomas asked for new lifting of Hector's bank secrecy. Subpoena, this time requesting complete statement of last 6 years. The result was even more shocking than first. Several $1 million received in transfers from offshore accounts over 5 years, from 2019 to 2024, average of $50,000 per surgery. Some yielded more, others less, depending on donor blood type and urgency of buyer. While assembling legal file, Veronica continued investigating on her own, using contacts she still had in hospital. Discovered Hector had scheduled another kidney stone removal surgery for August 15, 12 days from then. Patient named Mrs. Marta, 71 years. Blood type O negative just like mine. Veronica managed to see her file in system before being blocked. Perfect renal function. Creatinine 0.9. Clearance 85. Impeccable exams. That woman was going to be 12th victim if we didn't stop it. Deadly deadline. 12 days to gather sufficient proof. Hand everything to Department of Justice, FBI. Get arrest warrant. Prevent surgery. Save Mrs. Marta from losing kidneys, just like I lost. Pressure increased. Time tightened. But I had 42 years experience working under pressure, defending worker day before hearing, gathering last-minute proofs, staying up late, reading files, knew how to work against clock. Knew sometimes difference between winning and losing was question of hours, not days. On August 8, 7 days before Mrs. Marta's surgery, Veronica got something that changed game completely. Audio recording of conversation of Hector with unknown man. Conversation she captured hiding cell phone turned on inside his lab coat while he was in locker room of operating theater. Recording had 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Bad quality, but audible. Voice of Hector speaking with Gustavo. August 15. Patient O negative 71 years. Excellent renal function. Going to yield a few million pesos. Sick or $100,000. Deep voice answering. Accent from Monterrey, or maybe a heavy Tex-Mex accent. Both or just one, Hector? Both, obviously. Buyer is already confirmed. Transplant hospital in Houston, already separated bed. Recipient is going to enter surgery same day I finish here. Gustavo. And Edward is informed, Hector? Yes, already agreed with him. Prolonged anesthesia. Patient won't wake up before 4 hours. Time enough to extract both. Pack. Send on 10 a.m. flight. Gustavo. Is Ruben going to fetch there, or do you want me to send another driver? Hector. Ruben himself already knows way, knows security procedures. Conversation continued discussing logistics, payment form, offshore account where money was going to fall, technical details of how to keep organ viable during transport. Listening to that coldness with which they negotiate human parts freezes the blood. Time is running out for the next victim, Mrs. Marta, and Alice runs against clock. Will they manage to stop surgery in time? When I heard that recording, felt mix of victory and disgust. Victory, because it was irrefutable proof of premeditation, of criminal organization, of organ trafficking in active operation, and disgust of hearing Hector speaking of human kidney, as if it were spare car part, merchandise with tabulated price, product to be negotiated with buyer who paid more. Thomas took that recording, joined with 11 handwriting analyses, with bank statement showing millions, with testimonies of 10 victims, with table of temporal inconsistencies that proved lie in surgical reports, and assembled file of 340 pages that handed simultaneously to FBI and police, requesting opening of investigation for organ trafficking, racketeering, RICO, document forgery, serial aggravated assault, attempted, qualified homicide. On August 10, 5 days before Mrs. Marta's surgery, federal prosecutor analyzed file, called Thomas and me for meeting, heard recording, examined proofs, and said with serious face, "This here is one of gravest cases I have seen pass through my desk in 20 years of public ministry. I am going to ask for immediate preventive detention of all involved and cancellation of that scheduled surgery." On day 11 got order from federal judge for preventive detention of Hector, of Dr. Edward, of the so-called Gustavo, who appeared in recording, raid on St. Mary's Hospital, freezing of bank accounts, prohibition of practicing medicine. But before executing orders, something happened that almost ruined everything. Hector discovered I had hired lawyer, someone from hospital must have told. Medical gossip, protection network between colleagues. He called me August 12, altered voice, threatening tone he had never used before. "Auntie, if the lady continues with those absurd accusations, I am going to have to ask for judicial interdiction of the lady for senile dementia. I am going to prove the lady has no more mental capacity to manage her own life. I am going to assume guardianship of your assets." I let him speak, recorded everything in cell phone recording app, which had left prepared exactly for that moment, and when he finished threat, replied with calm voice, "Hector, the lady has no proof of anything. They are delusions of old age, invention of confused head." There I dropped bomb. "Hector, I have 11 files of patients you mutilated. I have 11 handwriting analyses proving you forged signatures. I have subpoena of your bank secrecy, showing suspicious transfers for millions. I have recording of you agreeing next surgery with so-called Gustavo. I have location of transplant hospital in Houston that receives stolen organs. I have name of driver Ruben, who does transport. I have name of anesthesiologist Edward, who helps you. You believe truly I am crazy?" Silence on other side of line. 8 whole seconds of silence that seemed eternity. Heavy breathing of his audible and afterwards click, hung up. 2 hours later, 10:30 at night, someone tried to force my door. Heard noise of key being forced in lock. Got up from bed, called 911, yelled very loud that already called patrol. Invader gave up. Heard steps running in hallway, going downstairs, disappearing in street. Police arrived 15 minutes later, filed report, explained situation, showed was under threat because of organ trafficking investigation. Patrol stayed on guard in front of building rest of night. Day August 13, 48 hours before scheduled surgery of Mrs. Marta, Veronica called me in hurry. "Counselor, got a thing the lady won't believe. Found a USB drive forgotten by Dr. Edward in locker room of operating theater. Was thrown inside his locker. Must have dropped it and didn't realize. Brought it home, opened on computer. There is file lady needs to see urgently. Asked her to come to my apartment. Arrived half-hour later. Opened her laptop on living room table. Connected drive. Opened folder called Operation Mandatory Donor. Inside was an Excel spreadsheet with 18 full rows. Each row represented a patient. 7 more names than we had found in the hospital records. It turned out Hector was operating in other facilities too. But spreadsheet showed 7 more that hadn't appeared in initial investigation. Probably operated in other hospitals of network or with false name or payment made in other account. Total moved. Millions of dollars in 5 years of operation. From 2019 to 2024. Spreadsheet also listed names of involved at end. Hector Beltran, nephrologist, coordinator. Edward Castillo, anesthesiologist, application and maintenance. Gustavo Fernandez, intermediary, sales and logistics. Claudia Mendoza, hospital director, administrative cover. Felipe, nurse, surgical assistants. Ruben, driver, organ transport. Gang of 6 people operating millionaire organ trafficking scheme for 5 years. How many victims exactly? 18 confirmed in sheet, but could be more that weren't documented there. Now I ask you one thing, and want your sincere answer there in comments. Was I wrong to have investigated my own nephew? There are people who criticized me afterwards, said I should have given benefit of doubt, that family isn't reported, that doctor knows what he does, that I should have trusted more, that I was rash, that ruined life of man who had brilliant future ahead. Are you in agreement with those people? You think I did wrong? What would you have done in my place if woke up from surgery without 2 kidneys? Discovered they were sold for millions? Discovered doctor was nephew you raised, whom you paid entire college for, whom treated like son? Would have reported or would have kept silence to not stain family name? Comment that. Your opinion without fear, without hypocrisy. Tell me what would have done truly. Because guarantee you, when it is you on gurney, when it is your organ being sold, when it is your life being reduced from 15 years to 3, answer changes completely. On the 14th of August, 2024, 6 a.m., FBI launched Operation, they baptized as Operation Bad Blood, or Nephros. Name that made double reference nephrology mixed with nefarious and that fell like bomb in hospitals of Texas. 6 arrest warrants executed simultaneously in different domiciles, 3 in San Antonio, 2 in Houston, 1 in Dallas. Coordinated operation, synchronized, to not give time for anyone to warn anyone, to not let any rat flee ship before sinking. Hector was first to fall. Agents of FBI knocked on door of his house at 6:05 a.m. Luxury condo in the Dominion, upscale San Antonio. Elegant building, gate with security, intercom, camera. He answered in boxers, hair messy, face of someone just woke up, and when saw feds with bulletproof vest and arrest warrant in hand, tried to gain time, said was going to dress, ran into bedroom. Agents went after, caught him sitting on edge of bed with laptop on legs, fingers flying on keyboard, trying to delete file, empty trash, erase trail, took computer from hand, handcuffed him, read Miranda rights, and started raid. Finally, justice knocks on door. Seeing those who believe themselves untouchable fall is satisfying, right? But story doesn't end with handcuffs on. Discover final impact this brave woman had. Found safe embedded in wall of walk-in closet, behind shoe rack, large safe, steel door, electronic lock. Hector refused to give password, said wasn't going to cooperate, wanted to speak with lawyer. FBI tech took 20 minutes to crack, and when opened, there was thousands in cash. Stacks of $100 bills. Smell of new money filling room, plus USB drives, external hard drive, 3 cell phones, documents, passport. Seized everything. Sealed in numbered plastic bags. Took to police car. Dr. Claudia Mendoza, hospital director, 62 years, lady of respectable appearance, gray hair well cut, expensive clothes, was arrested trying to flee through hospital parking lot. Agents arrived at 6:15 at her office. Wide room on 5th floor, mahogany desk, leather chair, view of city. Secretary said doctor hadn't arrived yet, accustomed to enter at 8. Agents got suspicious, went down to parking lot and found her inside silver Mercedes, key in ignition, ready to leave, suitcase in back seat. Knocked on glass, showed warrant. She locked door from inside, tried to start. Car didn't start because one of agents had pulled engine fuse while she was putting suitcase. Had to break side glass, unlock, take out by force. Handcuff right there in middle of parking lot, while hospital employee watched from afar, shocked, without understanding what was happening. Raid in her office yielded more proof. Computer with payroll of gang. Emails exchanged with so-called Gustavo, agreeing logistics of organ transport, fake contract of medical import company that served as front for scheme. In her apartment, in exclusive area of San Antonio, found millions in checking account. Mercedes, 0 kilometers in garage. Financial investments summing millions. All frozen, all seized, all confiscated as proceeds of crime RICO. Gustavo Fernandez, gang intermediary, man who connected provider doctors with buyer patients, was arrested in clandestine transplant clinic in South Houston, place feigning to be post-op recovery clinic, but in truth, did illegal transplants of organs bought on black market. Federal police invaded place at 6:30 a.m., found him on 2nd floor, talking with surgeon, planning transplant that was going to happen that same day. Kidney bought from victim in San Antonio that would be transplanted to businessman who had paid fortune to skip waiting list. Arrested both Gustavo and surgeon, plus 4 employees of clinic. Seized surgical equipment, imported medication, fake donor documentation. Raid in Gustavo's house, condo in Uptown, revealed safe with cash. Laptop with database of over 100 buyer patients. List of provider doctors scattered through whole country. Payroll showing scheme moved much more money than we imagined. Dr. Edward Castillo, anesthesiologist accomplice of Hector, 53 years, was arrested in his house, Alamo Heights neighborhood, also in San Antonio, without resistance, without trying to flee, accepted arrest with resignation of someone who knew that day was going to arrive sooner or later. Felipe, operating room nurse, 41 years, arrested on way to work, traffic of loop 410. FBI patrol cut off his car, ordered pullover, handcuffs, voice of arrest. And Ruben, driver who did transport of organs from hospital in San Antonio to airport, from there to Houston, 58 years, was only one who collaborated immediately, confessed everything, said only did what they ordered, that needed money, that repented, wanted to be protected witness. All 6 arrested same day, same hour, clean operation, efficient, that gave no chance for anyone to escape. Criminal process ran in federal court because organ trafficking is federal crime. Hector Beltran was indicted for 5 different crimes: organ trafficking, aggravated assault on 11 victims, wire fraud, forgery of documents, and racketeering, RICO. Prosecution asked maximum penalty on all crimes, summed, argued he had acted with coldness, premeditation, abusing trust of vulnerable patients, many elderly, all trusting him as doctor. Jury trial, which lasted 4 days, testimonies of victims, expert analysis presented, audio recording played in courtroom, spreadsheet from USB projected on screen. I, afterwards, on second day climbed to witness stand, showed my arms with dialysis fistula, showed needle marks, told every detail of betrayal, explained how boy I raised sold me for money. 3 people from audience cried during my testimony. 1 needed to leave to recover. On 4th day, jury came back with verdict. Guilty on all counts, without mitigating factors. Judge applied sentence of 28 years in federal prison, without right to parole. Federal system has no parole, just good time credit. Without right to pardon. Hector heard sentence with stone face, without crying, without emotion, sociopath until end, incapable of feeling genuine remorse. Dr. Edward Castillo, anesthesiologist, received 22 years for same crimes. Penalty slightly less, because wasn't leader, was accomplice. Dr. Claudia Mendoza received 19 years for racketeering, covering up, and corruption. She who used position of hospital director to cover scheme, to block internal investigation, to fire employee who questioned. Gustavo Fernandez, intermediary, considered leader of criminal organization by justice, received biggest penalty of all, 31 years, because coordinated entire network, connected providers and buyers, laundered money through offshore companies, planned logistics, controlled everything. Felipe, nurse, received 12 years for complicity, participation in surgeries, omission of reporting, and Ruben, driver, received 8 years, reduced penalty because cooperated, gave names, addresses, details that helped FBI arrest other involved of network. Total of 6 criminals, imprisoned, convicted, starting to serve long sentences. In federal penitentiaries of maximum security, separated one from others to not plan escape, not coordinate versions, not create problems. Besides penal penalties, justice determined confiscation of assets for millions in real estate, cars, bank accounts, investments, all frozen, all auctioned, money invested for victim reparation fund. In civil suit that ran parallel to criminal, each of 11 victims, 8 living plus families of 3 dead, received compensation for pain and suffering and punitive damages. Value set by judge, $2 million per victim. Amount that considered gravity of injury, suffering caused, loss of quality of life, permanent dependence on dialysis, reduction of life expectancy. Received my $2 million in January 2025. Money I deposited in bank, didn't spend on foolishness, saved to cover treatment, to live with dignity, years left to me. Besides indemnity, managed injustice that hospital would pay all my lifelong costs of hemodialysis, thousands per year, including dialysis sessions, meds, exams, consults, transport, everything. Hospital tried to appeal. Alleged was going to go bankrupt, that had no way to pay. But judge was inflexible. You allowed scheme to function inside your facilities. You failed in oversight. You are liable. Hospital lost operating license. CMS certification revoked in November 2024. Closed doors in December, building shut down, employees fired, patients transferred to other hospitals. Dr. Claudia had all assets seized. Condo, Mercedes, investments transferred to victim fund. Hector had medical license canceled permanently, unanimous decision by medical board, preventing him from practicing medicine anywhere in US for rest of life, even after leaving prison, if leaves, because 28 years is almost life sentence for man of 42. Police investigation didn't stop at 6 initial prisoners. Continued deepening, following banking trails, investigating suspicious hospitals, breaking secrets, interrogating witnesses. Discovered scheme wasn't isolated to San Antonio, was interstate network with branches in 4 southern states, 4 private hospitals involved, each with provider doctor connected to Gustavo, each doing average 3-4 surgeries per year, extracting kidneys from patients who trusted were going only to remove stone. Total victims identified: 34 people, not 18, as spreadsheet showed, nor 11, as we had discovered initially. 34 lives destroyed, 34 people dependent on dialysis for rest of existence, some already dead by complications, others surviving like me, trapped in hospital routine, needles in arm, blood circulating outside body, machine doing work kidney should do. Total diverted by complete network, over 9 years of operation, tens of millions of dollars. Money that fell in offshore accounts of criminals, while victims lost organs, health, dignity, years of life. 12 doctors involved in whole scheme, 8 already imprisoned, 4 still fugitives, sought by Interpol, arrest warrants issued, but hiding in some country without extradition treaty. Great surprise of whole investigation was understanding for whom stolen organs went, who were buyers. Weren't just international patients, rich foreigners, who came to US to seek kidney, as imagined at start. Overwhelming majority was American. Rich people, businessmen, politicians, artists, people who had money enough to skip transplant list, paying for stolen organ. Official kidney transplant list in US has thousands of people waiting, average wait time 3 to 5 years. But if you had money, called Gustavo, he connected you with provider, doctor, marked surgery. You receive kidney in matter of weeks, without waiting, without bureaucracy, without questions. Kidney that would cost 0 on list, covered by insurance, donated voluntarily by relative or deceased donor, was sold for fortune on black market. Perverse system, where poor lost organ without knowing, and rich bought organ without questioning origin. Chain of crime that functioned perfectly lubricated by money, by corruption, by doctors without scruples who sold Hippocratic oath for fat percentage. Case resonated nationally, came out in every newspaper, every magazine, every news channel in country. CBS 60 Minutes did special report. Complete piece with interviews of victims, images of closed hospital, fragments of recording of Hector agreeing organ sale, graphic animation explaining how scheme worked, called me to give interview. Filmed in my apartment, showed my arms with dialysis catheter coming out of chest. 2 thin hoses stay there hanging all time. Entry door for blood to go out and return 3 times a week. Reporter asked, "How does the lady feel knowing was betrayed by whom lady raised?" Replied, looking straight at camera, "Feel I trusted wrong person, but don't regret having investigated, having reported, having destroyed that scheme. If had stayed quiet for being family, how many other victims would Hector have made? How many other old women were going to wake up without kidneys, condemned to die in 3-4 years?" Report had millions of views, comments by thousands, majority supporting, some few criticizing, saying went too far, that family isn't reported, that doctor deserved second chance. Primetime News called me too, gave interview live. Primetime, millions of Americans watching. Anchor asked direct questions, and I replied with same objectivity. Lady believes nephew planned this from beginning? Believe yes. Signals were all there since March. Questions about will, about blood type, about renal function, insistence to do exams, surgery marked far from where I live. All calculated, coldly planned, executed with surgical precision, literally. Case generated commotion sufficient to install investigations in Congress. Committee with objective to investigate failures in oversight, propose changes in legislation, harden penalties, was summoned to testify, traveled to Washington, D.C., sat in witness chair, 3 hours of technical testimony transmitted live on C-SPAN. Explained every detail of scheme, showed documents, expert analysis, proofs, answered questions from senators, some trying to disqualify me, insinuating I had personal motive too strong to be reliable, that my testimony was contaminated by vengeance. Replied with calm, "Vengeance would be having killed him, Senator. Justice is having put him in jail for 28 years, using laws you approved." What a class of response. With that single phrase, Licha not only shut up Senator, but gave us lecture on dignity to all. Despite having broken body, her mind continues being lethal weapon. Listen how her fight managed to change laws to protect us all. Committee concluded works in December, with final report of 200 pages, recommendations of changes in National Organ Transplant Act, proposals of stricter oversight of hospitals, creation of National Registry of Nephrectomy Surgeries. Veronica, my ally, nursing tech who risked everything to help me, also had happy ending in story. Sued hospital for wrongful termination, pain and suffering, material damages, whistleblower retaliation. Her lawyer, indicated by Thomas, assembled strong process, presented proof she had been fired exactly for questioning Hector, that firing was reprisal, that hospital violated her rights. 1. Hospital tried to appeal, lost in court. Firm decision in March 2025. Compensation, $500,000, pain and suffering, plus other thousands material damages, plus retroactive payment of months stayed unemployed. Veronica took that money and realized ancient dream. Opened clinic for accompaniment for autistic children in San Antonio, beautiful place, painted with cheerful colors, occupational therapy room, speech therapy room, psychology room, sensory space with adapted toys, external garden with swing and slide, offers free therapies for 40 low-income children, families who don't have condition to pay thousands per month, as she paid for her kids. Santiago and Sofia, twins of 11 years, do complete therapy now, 3 times a week each, intensive accompaniment, and their evolution was impressive. Santiago started speaking loose words. Thing didn't do before. Sofia improved eye contact, started playing with other children. Veronica calls me every week to tell news, to thank, to say nothing of that would have happened if she hadn't found courage to help me. Created security protocol I presented to Department of Health in February 2025, document of 30 pages called Pre-Surgical Nephrectomy Checklist, set of mandatory measures for any surgery involving kidney removal. Protocol determines every patient going to do renal surgery, even if only to remove stone, needs to sign specific consent form with fingerprint collected, not just signature that can be forged. Term needs to be witnessed by person, external to hospital, social worker, public defender, someone who has no link with doctor or institution. Patient needs to receive copy of term 24 hours before surgery. Have time to read calmly. Consult lawyer if wants. Not sign on fly eve. Nephrectomy surgery can only be performed in hospital with specific certification from health department, not in any place. And most important, doctor who performs nephrectomy without proven necessity answers criminally for aggravated assault, with jail penalty. Cannot allege medical error, cannot allege decision taken during surgical act, needs to have prior opinion of another nephrologist, confirming necessity. Health Department accepted protocol, published agreement in March, and implemented in whole country starting April. Result: 0 cases of unauthorized removal since protocol entered force. No patient went to stone surgery and woke up without kidneys. No new victim, entire scheme dismantled. Continue doing hemodialysis 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. 4 hours each session. Routine that becomes life, that becomes prison, but keeps body functioning. Entered kidney transplant list in January 2025. Blood type O negative. Difficult compatibility. Big line. Advanced age, which places me with low priority. Average wait time for woman of 79 years, 2 to 4 years. If have luck, if compatible donor appears, if survive time enough for turn to arrive, real chances? Doctor was honest. Small, Miss Cardenas, but not impossible. While wait, became voluntary consultant, attend 15 cases per month of renal patients suspicious of medical malpractice, who had strange surgery, who lost kidneys without convincing explanation. Analyze file, compare exams, identify inconsistency, orient on rights, indicate lawyers when necessary, don't charge nothing, do it free. My way of transforming tragedy into purpose, of guaranteeing disgrace happened with me, serves to protect other people. Give lectures too, some 15 per year, in law schools, med schools, nephrology congresses. Topic: medical ethics, limits of doctor-patient relationship, importance of documenting procedures, how to detect trafficking schemes. Fees they pay for me are good, but I give 100% to dialysis clinic attending poor patients in San Antonio, people who have no money even to pay transport to hospital. Donated money that costs treatment of 30 needy patients, saving lives while mine goes extinguishing slowly. I am Alice Cardenas Beltran, have 79 years, born in Laredo, Texas, daughter of Jose Engineer and Anna Washerwoman. Simple people, poor, honest, who taught me since little that paper is worth more than word, that document has memory, that lie always leaves trail for whoever knows to search. That is complete story of my life, of how girl of railroader who learned to read documents at 8 years, who identified adulterated date in medical certificate and saved job of dad's colleague, grew up and became labor lawyer, who defended over 3,000 cases in 42 years of profession, who developed method of comparing paper with paper to find written lie, who memorized exam values, who never forgot number, who kept everything in head just like computer, of how that woman, already old, already retired, already tired of working so much, was betrayed by nephew she raised as son, whom paid medical school and nephrology residency for, invested millions in training and received as payment criminal extraction of 2 kidneys, sold for thousands on black market, condemning her to 3-4 years of life, dependent on dialysis machine. Of how that same woman, mutilated, betrayed, abandoned by family, who preferred to believe lying doctor than lawyer aunt, used every technique had learned in 4 decades of profession to investigate, gather proof, assemble file of 340 pages, break bank secrecy, hire handwriting expert, locate other victims, form alliance, with fired nursing tech, record confession of criminal, hand everything to federal prosecutor, and take down millionaire organ trafficking scheme, functioning for 9 years. Lost my 2 kidneys on operating table, ripped out by whom should heal, sold as merchandise by whom should protect me, but didn't lose what always defined me: capacity to read between lines of any document, to memorize every number of every exam, to compare paper with paper until find lie, to use head that still functions perfectly, although body fails, although organs disappear, although life shortens. Proved family doctor who sells aunt's organ deserves no pardon, deserves prison, deserves having career destroyed, name stained, liberty taken for 28 years. Proved 9-year-old lawyer, trapped in dialysis machine 12 hours a week, still manages to take down criminal organization, put 6 traffickers in jail, recover millions in assets, save next victim going to lose kidneys, create national security protocol protecting millions of Americans, and continue proving all day, in every lecture give, in every voluntary consult do, in every patient orient, that what matters isn't having hands to sign, isn't having kidneys to filter blood, is having head to think, memory to keep proof, courage to report, persistence to fight until end. Today, while the rhythmic hum of the dialysis machine marks the beat of my sunsets, I look at my scars not as holes, but as maps of a war won. They ripped a part of my body from me, but they could never extirpate the essence, that capacity to read the hidden truth between lines of ink and blood. I have learned that life is not measured by the years left to us, but by the dignity with which we decide to hold our gaze in the face of betrayal. Justice, just like the old paper I loved so much, is the only thing that remains when everything else fades away. If this story touched some fiber in your soul, subscribe to the channel. Let's keep making the truth resonate louder than oblivion.